Today we're going to talk about Matt Gaetz and Kevin McCarthy screwing themselves over with their mangled shutdown attempt, and I interview Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about Trump's visiting a non-union shop during the union auto workers strike, the GOP's dysfunction that almost led to a government shutdown, and the disaster that was the Biden impeachment inquiry hearing. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. So we very narrowly avoided a shutdown. The House finally managed to pass a 45-day continuing resolution, which means that we'll be right back here again in a month and a half, and then we can watch all over again as Republicans fail to accomplish even the most basic tasks in government. But it was the way that this went down that exposed both Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz as losers here. So basically, the only way that the government would stay open would be if McCarthy offered something that moderate Republicans could stomach, meaning not the deep, draconian cuts that the initial Republican bill included. But Matt Gaetz came out and said that if McCarthy offered that clean bill without those cuts, that he would offer a motion to vacate, meaning he would move to oust him as Speaker. Although, if the government did shut down, then that would also fall squarely on McCarthy's shoulders. So, not great either way for Kevin McCarthy as the weakest Speaker in history, being led on a short leash by the worst people ever to work in government. Now, ultimately, McCarthy had no choice but to bring a clean bill to the floor, extending the government's funding for 45 days. And what's craziest is that it was the Democrats who actually got it over the finish line. This thing passed 335 to 91, with 90 Republicans voting no, while just one Democrat voted no. Meaning, yet again, it was the Democrats who kept the government open while saving the Republicans from themselves. And by the way, this isn't a win for anyone on the right. Kevin McCarthy is going to be in this exact same position again in 45 days. He's still facing an imminent threat of a motion to vacate. And as for Matt Gaetz, McCarthy called his bluff, meaning the onus is now on Gaetz to bring that motion to vacate to the floor. And if Gaetz doesn't succeed at ousting McCarthy as Speaker, which is probably more of an uphill battle than not, then he's going to look like a fool. Here are a couple of far-right Republicans already starting to pour cold water on the Gaetz plan to oust McCarthy.
Very disappointing. Spending as usual up here. No border control. Very disappointing. But we'll live to fight another day.
So if there's a vote to vacate, would you vote for it?
Look, we got our hands full. We'll see. We'll see what he does. We'll see how I'm disappointed. I wish we'd fought. We just didn't fight.
And look, this is a done deal, okay? Let's move on, and let's make sure that next year we talk about being fiscally conservative so we could save our future and save our children and our children's children.
Would you vote to vacate the chair?
That's a conversation that I'm not even willing to have right now.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly inspire confidence in Matt Gaetz's plan's mutiny, does it? All of which is to say, neither one of these guys comes out of this thing on top, Gaetz or McCarthy. The GOP remains steeped in dysfunction, and the sole focus right now of the entire media is just what'll happen next in this promised Republican civil war. Here's Lauren Boebert showing just how not into this news cycle she is.
We should have forced them to come to the negotiating table and come to conference and hash out our differences with these four appropriations bills before there was another payday that was at risk of being missed.
Would you vote to oust the Speaker?
That isn't what we're talking about right now.
Well, I mean, Matt Gaetz has said that he said if he puts this on the floor, he said that if he relies on Democratic votes, he will no longer be Speaker. Sure, but if he puts it on the floor,
my focus is getting the federal government funded as we ought to, with 12 individual spending bills like we promised everyone in January. Unfortunately, now we're at 45 days of the same bipartisan muscle memory of just a straight up and down vote, and whatever's in it is good with us.
And by the way, it's not going to get any easier for Republicans. And so now they go from this terrible news cycle of their party's dysfunction nearly leading to the government shutting down to their party's infighting as a far-right extremist threatens to tank his own party's speaker. Starting to think that maybe imbuing the world's biggest circus clowns with power might not have been such a hot idea in retrospect. So just because Donald Trump isn't in office doesn't mean that the dysfunction of the MAGA wing of the GOP has gone away. If anything, this is what we can expect moving forward. They have not done a single thing to disabuse us of the notion that they are willing or capable of governing. So we'll see more infighting, more extreme demands, more shutdown threats, more promises to oust their own speaker. All the while, it's the American people who suffer. It's the American people who don't have the benefit of competent representation. It's the American people who look like fools across the world because we have these clowns running the U.S. government. A lot of us are making the case to put the adults in charge in 2024, but no one is making it better than the Republicans. Here's a preview of my interview with Pete Buttigieg. So this past week, President Biden made history by becoming the first sitting president to stand in solidarity with striking auto workers. Meanwhile, we've got Donald Trump responding by visiting a non-union shop. What was your reaction to seeing Trump's visit?
Well, I think that the union leadership was very clear that they see through the politics of this and they're focused on who's actually going to stand with them. Look, the Trump administration was not exactly pro-labor or pro-union. Matter of fact, there was a UAW strike when President Trump was in office. He didn't go then. I remember, because I was campaigning, meeting with striking GM workers in 2019. The president did make history by going, and I think that's fitting because he is proud of being the most pro-worker, pro-union president ever, not just compared to the Trump administration, which was particularly anti-union, but really more than any other president of either party in modern times. And so that's always been a very deep part of his political identity. And I think very natural for President Biden to be there on the picket line, not to insert himself into the finer points of the negotiations, but to make clear where this administration stands, that this can be a win-win. The companies will be just fine in a scenario where they take good care of the workers.
Well, there was a lot of media coverage that equated the two, that equated Trump and Biden, with a number of them refusing to even acknowledge that Trump didn't even visit union workers. Does that kind of both sides coverage worry you at all?
I think a lot of times you see that, and the best way to see through that or see around it is to listen to the actual voices of the folks who were there. The former president was really rejected by the UAW leadership. I think partly because they are not doing, sometimes there's an effort to put words in their mouths. The UAW is not saying that we can somehow trap everybody in the old technology. What they're saying is, given that things like EVs are going to be more and more part of the future, they better come with good paying jobs, just like the old technologies did when we were making those in places like South Bend in the 1960s and ever since. We've got to make sure that every evolution in technology is one that helps, not hurts workers. And that's not something that the last administration showed a lot of commitment to, but our administration is very focused, not just on making sure EVs happen. The reality is this is a technology that is already happening. It's that they happen on American soil with American workers getting good American wages to support their families.
Yeah, I did notice that the vast majority of the attacks, because they can't figure out where to land these attacks, is just blaming everything on EVs, that everything would be totally fine if not for EVs, which the irony is that the move to renewables, the move to electric vehicles is inevitable anyway, but they just need to land on something to blame all of this on.
Well, the other irony is the last administration really allowed China to get an edge when it came to EVs. They worked hard in China and put a lot of investment into developing these technologies. I don't really think it's because the Chinese Communist Party is deeply into green principles and all about cutting emissions. I think it's because they saw an advantage in terms of economic strategy. We see, similarly, there's an advantage in terms of U.S. economic strategy, and yes, also an environmental advantage to being the leaders in this technology. And you see the factories going up, the jobs being created. And let's be very clear, the choice is not between EVs or somehow just being trapped in the old car technologies forever. The choice is between whether the EVs will be made in China or whether they'll be made in America.
And by the way, it's not just EVs that China gained a competitive advantage in. It was solar panels. It was a lot of renewable technology because the U.S. refused to invest in that stuff because we were focused, especially during the Trump administration, in entrenching our reliance on fossil fuels and coal, these dying industries. And so that gave China the same competitive advantage that they're complaining about now and trying to blame on the White House here. So to check out the full interview with Pete, click the thumbnail right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also click the link on the screen for the audio version of this episode. And finally, to see more of my content, you can find the subscribe link on the screen as well.